That kids who read books have a bigger vocabulary.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Wow, Jinx. Did you guys know that friendly children have more friends?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
That's true. I knew that. Did you guys know that winter babies are better at music?
Everyone knows that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
obvious.
Oh, hey, guys, did you know that most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Huh, didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure I knew that.
I'm pretty sure you didn't.
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right car seat at the right age and size. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat to make sure your child is protected. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Hello.
Hey man, you up?
No.
Wake up, I need to talk to you. I think your house is haunted.
Hey, come on, it's 2:30 in the morning.
I can't sleep in here, man. I'm scared.
All right, welcome back to Spooky Southcoast. Tim Weisberg here, along with science advisor Matt Moniz. And we have Katie in the studio with us again this week. And we are going to be joining up with our guest right now. I'm really excited to talk about this stuff again because we didn't do a good enough job, I don't think, when we had our guest on previously. I think that we just started to scratch the surface. And I think tonight we can get more in-depth. Thomas P. Fusco is an independent researcher who has devoted nearly 3 decades investigating the relationship between mind, physics, spirituality, parapsychology, scientific anomalies, and paranormal phenomena, with the goal of uncovering the unifying cosmological framework that has eluded mankind for generations. And he has been invited to speak as a guest on over 100 national and international radio programs, including this program in the past. And we welcome back Thomas Fusco to Spooky Southcoast. Good evening, Thomas. How are you?
Oh, great, guys. How's it going?
Oh, we are spooktacular, as we say here.
Oh, that's a good one. I like it.
Thanks. And we were very excited to have you back because, as I said, when we had you on before, I got some comments from a lot of listeners who said, it was a great topic, a great discussion, but they just felt like we were only starting to get to the beginning of the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. And, of course, the clock is always against us on this show.
Yeah, and of course, as you know from before, my work covers such a wide scope of subjects and touches upon so many things that it really is challenging trying to compress it in that time.
And what's interesting about your work, too, is that you're not coming at this from necessarily a paranormal viewpoint. I mean, this is a theory that you've come up with to explain so much more than just what we talk about here on this program.
That's true. It's an attempt to come up with a new paradigm, an actual new way of looking at the entire realm of reality. And then with that model, then we could say, okay, let's look at astrophysics and see what that tells us about that. And let's look at quantum physics and see what it tells us about that. Let's look at parapsychology. Let's look at the paranormal. And so that was the idea, to get a broad picture of reality that would give us a concept in which all of these varied fields can find a home in.
And I think that too many people pigeonhole the paranormal. They kind of go with what has been the tried and true theories over the years. I mean, we're kind of locked into the idea of ghosts being dead people, for example. And that may not necessarily be the case. So what's interesting about your work is that it not only allows you to open your mind a little bit more to some other possibilities, it kind of forces you to.
Yeah, and traditionally, in all fairness, we have a situation where we have kind of almost been held back in the paranormal by primarily talking about what I call the perpetrator, or the person or the being or the intelligence or whatever that might be initiating these things. And we haven't had a real good model before of what I call paranormal mechanics, or what we might call the forensics of paranormal events. And so once we get a good working model of that, then we can open up and get a little bit away from the criminology, so to speak, and deal more with the forensics of it.
And that seems to be where a lot of the controversy rises up. Is there is this as you're calling him the perpetrator, but there is this greater consciousness behind everything here, and so many people who are willing to accept it. We'll call it, just for the sake of this one little portion of our argument tonight, God's will. That's how people look at it, and they explain things as God's will, and they look at the investigation of the paranormal as going against God's will, that we're not meant to understand that. And I'm assuming that your theory does not suggest that learning about this topic is taboo.
My way of looking at it is this, and again, I'm trying to stay on the forensics or kind of physics of it, and the way I look at it is this, is that everything that is physical, a physical observation, for example, a physical effect that actually interacts with its environment. For example, when we're dealing with paranormal phenomena, these things are observable, which means the effects that they're creating are physical. If that's the case, then they have to be operating according to the laws and principles by which the greater universe is assembled. They may be aspects of laws and principles that we haven't really understood or discovered yet, but they can't be operating in a way that's contrary to or outside of the order in which the universe is put together. Now, if there's a creator that created that universe, that creator created that same order, and so these things are occurring according to the same order. If we were speaking about a morality to it, I think that's a different issue than the physics of it.
Well, and I like being able to separate it and to speak about it forensically, and let's just make it clear to people throughout the course of the discussion tonight that that's what we're doing. Because we always get emails and calls into the station about sometimes when we talk about the deeper meaning of some of these that we're not really understanding, and we want people to understand that we're looking at this from a scientific point of view. And I got to be honest with you, Tom. In the last few months, we've been calling out a lot of these so-called scientific investigative groups, people who investigate the paranormal and feel that they're doing it through a clearly scientific lens. I'm guessing that from what you know about today's quote-unquote paranormal field, that they're not quite getting it. They're not quite investigating it in as scientifically a method as they can.
Well, I would say that, I would agree very much with you, but I also would temper that, again, with an understanding, with a balance, that it is almost impossible to construct good scientific experiments unless you are testing a theory. Mm-hmm. It's the theory itself that drives the construction of the experiment and the purpose of the experiment. So while people are trying to measure things with scientifically designed instruments, without a good theoretical model, number one, and number two, without a good enough understanding of science in order to actually be able to produce and to set up a controlled, scientifically relevant laboratory environment on a remote site. Without those two things, unfortunately, it may not be much better at times than a tourist running around the countryside with a high-tech video camera.
Now, Tom, as a scientist, I wrote a little article about this, and I call it the 4 Ps. You have to plan. In other words, you create a theory and write a protocol. Then you practice your protocol. You run simulations. Then you actually perform your experimentation. And then the last P is a peer review. You publish and put out what you found and allow other people to review it. That is the appropriate scientific method, correct?
I would say that's a very good way of putting it, Moniz. But again, I try to be accommodating and understanding by acknowledging the fact that we haven't really had a good model of paranormal phenomenon for people to follow and say, well, if this is the theoretical model, then we should be able to find these particular types of findings if we set up these particular kinds of experiments. And that's one of the things that people have been saying that my work is finally beginning to provide to that field.
Right, because the models that we're using in, say, for example, in the investigation of ghosts, we're using a model of that's built more in folklore than it is in science. And with UFOs, we're building something that's built more in probably urban mythology and urban folklore and urban legend more than we are in any kind of scientific model.
Yeah, there's an overemphasis on what I call the perpetrator, because we don't have anything concrete in between. I kind of liken it to a commercial I saw a few years ago. I think it was for selling a particular car. It showed a driver driving down the street. Of course, he's moving down the street, but it showed the car being invisible. All you could see is the driver in a seated position. You could tell the driver was in a car with his hands on the steering wheel, but the car was completely invisible. So when you don't have any vision of the mechanism, everything gets blamed on the driver. So the driver is what's moving everything down the street. The driver moved the lamp. The driver did this. The driver made the cold spot, because you don't have a vision of any mechanism in between where the process actually takes place. So I try to keep a balanced view of it, but at the same time give people a good idea of what's actually missing and where we need to go.
So how did you come up with your model then? I mean, obviously you've been researching this for quite a long time, but how did you go beyond then what we have come to commonly accept as the culprits behind this all?
Well, I had a certain image in my mind as to how the universe might be put together to allow all these things to occur. But I also understood that I had to come up with something that was far more concrete than just a mental image. So in thinking about quite a few things, actually, it occurred to me that the first thing we needed to do is to come up with a paradigm, the best possible way that we could come up with at looking at the universe. And the way I look at it is, if you could imagine discovering the Great Pyramid of Giza, and we happen to discover it, it's completely disassembled. All the blocks are spread out all over the plains of Giza. And furthermore, we don't have another pyramid in the world to compare it to, so that we know exactly what it looks like. This is kind of what it's like trying to pick apart reality. Now, every stone that's laying out there, if we stand upon that stone and look out upon the rest of the building blocks of reality, so to speak, each one of those positions gives us a unique and different perspective on reality. What my challenge was is to find the one stone, the one perspective to look from that seems to make all the other blocks fall together. And of course, in the pyramid's instance, that stone would be the capstone. It would be the very top stone that was actually shaped like the entire pyramid. And once you found that stone, all the other ones would naturally fall beneath it. And so for me, that brings me to my definition of the universe, the primary paradigm from which to look at reality, to say that the universe is an expression of materialized and materializing information. Now, once we get that concept, we can begin to understand the uncertainties of quantum physics. Mm-hmm. We can begin to understand things like paranormal phenomena, because essentially what we're looking at is a collection or instances of materializing information. We can look at parapsychology and understand that things like remote viewing is actually the materialization of information within the arena of the human brain. And now suddenly the barriers begin to fall down, and we begin to see a very strong link between everything in reality, not just paranormal, but normal objects and structures as well.
it sounds kind of like we're dealing, with the Matrix, where everything is kind of, ones and zeros, and it's all being kind of downloaded into the form that we perceive it as.
In a sense, yes. I don't know whether we can, there are areas where there is similarity between the information of our reality and computer binary code. There are some similarities, but we've not really found a one-to-one direct relationship. I think a better way of looking at it is to pull towards more of the mainstream scientific view, in that we understand today that everything is assembled from information. So much so that modern physics has created an extension to the old conservation laws, which we were all taught in school. Matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. In modern physics, we have an extension of that law, which is called quantum unitarity. And what that means is that the information from which matter and energy is assembled also can neither be created nor destroyed. The main difference with my work is to identify that principle of information as the capstone, not one of the lower blocks, but that's actually the top block. And that's probably a little bit more accurate of a way of looking at it and thinking about the binary code of computers. But it's a good metaphor.
Well, so then if this information is out there, then we should be able to access it. I mean, if our brains are just computers for this information, is the universe the entire mainframe that we can access all the data points from?
Well, here's the thing. The universe, being a collection of materialized and materializing information, leads us to two other questions. These are the blocks directly under the capstone. And one of those questions is, what is the source of this information? Which, as you know, is part of an age-old question that we still haven't really cracked the answer to. Where did universal order come from? Mm-hmm. We still don't know the answer to that. And even that gets today, even with scientists, to get almost religious and philosophical, where you have the one religion that says there must be a prime cause, like Newton or Aristotle believed, and then you have another side which is very atheistic that says the cause is actually contained within the effect. But the other question, other than where this information comes from, is to describe the mechanism as to how this information materializes. And since we have materialization of information all around us, not only the objects near us, but stars, planets, galaxies, that mechanism to materialize that information must be part of some observations that we have had for a long time, but have been misinterpreting them.
Well, how so?
Well, for example, one of the examples I give in my book is I ask people to set aside their conventional thinking for a moment. And let's consider an idea. Let's talk about imagining being a primitive man or a woman 50,000 years ago. We're modern people. We have modern brains, Homo sapiens, but we don't have any knowledge of anything that we would call science. We don't understand that at all. All we know is what we've observed from our natural surroundings and what we can learn from them. And, imagine walking out into an open field like you've done many times before, and you feel the wind blow on your face. But this time a question enters your mind. Is the wind being pushed along or pulled along? Does the wind blow or does it suck? Everything that we would know about the wind locally would be the same for either. We can't really tell. But now we make assumptions based on conventional thinking, our own personal paradigms and experiences. We can we can build up air in our lungs and blow it out of our mouths, and it feels like we're making a wind. We can push our hand through the air and make a sort of a wind. So everything conventional in our minds tells us the wind blows. But the scientific truth of it is is that the wind is primarily a function of the movement of air molecules, a volume, from an area of high pressure to an adjacent area of low pressure. Now, you know, scientifically speaking, it's more correct to say that vacuums draw volumes into themselves. It's incorrect to say that volumes push themselves into vacuums. So the predominant function of the wind is one of pulling. The wind actually sucks. All of our conventional thinking and our conventional assumptions are completely wrong. Now, what if we applied that to gravity? What if gravity really wasn't an attractive force? What if the reason why every time we try to reckon with what the substance of gravity is, not what they taught you in school, folks, they told you they were teaching you about gravity, but they were actually teaching you about gravitational effect. They could not be teaching you about gravity because nobody really knows what gravity is. Substantially, they don't know what it is. What if we're looking at it the wrong way? What if Maxwell was wrong in his conclusion that since gravity appeared to work like electromagnetic attraction, that it must be a similar force? What if it works the opposite way? What if it is a force that pushes down, that focuses inwards towards objects and tends to grab smaller objects in its quote-unquote wind and pushes them down onto the larger object? Something like the lint that collects at the end of your vent, you know, for your dryer, that the wind's blowing all these particles and pushing it up against the screen on the lint screen as if it was the surface of the earth. Everything that we would know about gravity locally would be identical. We could still work our calculations to launch satellites out into space and around the gravity wells and planets and, you know, use the moon and whatever for a slingshot. It would all work the same way. But the conclusion we could draw about the actual way the universe is put together would be very different, and it would explain why we always fail when we try to apply our conventional reasoning to gravity, why we can't reconcile quantum physics with relativity because of gravity, why Einstein couldn't figure out he never concluded how to express gravity in 4 dimensions, why the standard model of the universe, capital S, capital M, has no expression for gravity. This would start beginning to make sense and explain, well, this is why we can't find these things, because we're looking at gravity in the wrong way.
It sounds like we're looking at pretty much everything the wrong way, that there needs to be kind of a across-the-board re-examination of what we believe.
And, you know, this would provide a very simple answer, which, as you know, anyone who has studied Einstein's writings extensively knows that Einstein was very supportive of the idea of simplicity. He would call theories like what we call string theory today, he would say they violate what his principle was of unnecessary complexity. He said a good physical theory is something that a school child should be able to understand. And so talking about gravity in this way and beginning to look at the bends of space that are associated with gravity in this way begins to give us a simple way to start connecting all kinds of things together.
Well, we're about 5 minutes away from having to take a break for the network news, and of course in the second hour of the show we can get even more in-depth in some of these things. But the phone lines will be open as well if anybody wants to call in and ask any questions of our guest, Thomas Fusco. The numbers are 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. You can also email us, spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com, or you can jump into the chat room on Spooky TV at spookysouthcoast.com. And I think as we're heading into the break here, we want to let everybody know that you can go to Tom's website, cosmicveil.com. That's cosmicveil.com, and that's where you can find out more about Thomas Fusco, his work, and about the book Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality, Merging Science, the Spiritual, and the Supernatural. And you can purchase a copy of the book yourself right there from his website. How much is the book, Tom?
Well, we have a sale going right now from our distributor's site that you can pick it up for like $19.95. It's going for about $25 on Barnes & Noble and Amazon because it's a pretty fat book.
It is.
If you order it directly through our distributor, you get a discount. Use that promotion code that's on the page. And if you're still, if you're not in a fetal position after you're done, you'll be able to call in on the second hour.
And I got to tell you too, it's even at $25. I mean, you're getting value in this book because of the number of questions that you address in the book, and we'll get into a lot of that coming up in the second hour. But you must be hearing back from a lot of people now in the time since the book has come out, of people saying to you, I have pretty much thrown out my previous way of thinking, and I've adopted this model.
I've had a lot of people tell me how remarkable this was, and how it's actually changing the way that they're looking at reality. So yes, it's been working very well, and I spent a lot of time writing the book so that it was very systematic and very simple. Trust me, you don't need a college degree to understand it. I spent a lot of time making it easy to access.
And what's interesting about it is as you're reading it, there's going to be a lot of things that you say, wow, gee, I never thought of it like that before. And then there's going to be a lot of things where you look at it and say, no, I can't believe that. Tom Fusco, you're trying to drive me crazy here with this theory. And that's what makes it such a great work, is that it does inspire that type of reaction to the questioning of fundamental beliefs.
Yeah, and the great thing about it, too, which I'm very happy about, and we're going to get into that, I'm sure, in the second hour, is that what I've laid out is different than what people have seen before. It's not philosophical in its fundamental core. It's not a metaphysics. It's actually a scientific theory, and that it makes specific predictions about aspects of reality that are experimentally testable. That's something that's never come before.
Well, and that's something that I'm sure Moniz will have some thoughts and opinions on as well. So we are going to take a break now for the news. As I said, remember, during the break, you can just go to cosmicveil.com, cosmicveil.com, to find out more about the book Behind the Cosmic Veil and to order your copy as well. Get it there while it's on the special deal. When we come back in the second hour, we will talk more with our guest, Thomas Fusco. We'll also take your calls. Again, the numbers will be 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420 is the toll-free line. Email spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com, and jump into the chat room as well on spookytv@spookysouthcoast.com. Also, during the break, you can go to our website and find out more about our upcoming Legend Trips event, October 20th at the Fearing Tavern in Wareham, Mass. It's Haunted History Night 2012. You'll get hours of investigation, dinner, Q&A, lectures, and a live taping of the 30-odd minutes television program. It's not to be missed. $99 for the tickets and a special room deal at the Days Inn in Middleborough if you're interested, for just $70 plus tax. You can't beat that. And you don't even have to make the bed when you're done. So stay tuned. We will be right back, coming up with more after the news here on Spooky South Coast.
The station the South Coast turns to for news, sports, and weather. WBSM New Bedford, AM 1420, WBSM.
From ABC News, I'm Richard Cantu. The newly formed Republican presidential ticket will be introducing itself to North Carolina tomorrow. Early this morning in Virginia, Mitt Romney announced House Budget Committee Chair Paul Ryan of Wisconsin as his running mate.
He's worked in Washington over the past 14 years, but you know what? In his heart is still Janesville, Wisconsin. Small town America still defines a great man like Paul Ryan.
Ryan has offered long-term spending proposals that would slash trillions of dollars in federal spending and, critics say, end Medicare as we know it. ABC News senior Washington editor Rick Klein says Democrats have been attacking Ryan on that for years.
They've already been using the Paul Ryan budget as a major talking point in their campaign. Now it's even more closely associated with Mitt Romney. There's no opportunity now for Mitt Romney to avoid tough questions about Paul Ryan and what he wants to do with Medicare and with the federal budget.
President Obama's in Chicago. Fundraisers tied to his recent 51st birthday. He looks to raise $4 million before embarking on a 3-day swing through Iowa. 2 strong earthquakes rattled northwest Iran. Officials say almost 200 people were killed and more than 1,300 injured. Mohsen Aksari of the BBC is in Tehran.
66 rescue team have been sent to the affected area with 4 helicopters and lots of food, blanket, tents. Unfortunately, the death toll is mounting at the moment, and we will expect more death toll.
Officials say 6 entire villages were flattened. Numerous others suffered damage ranging from 50% to 80%. Police here in New York City shot and killed a man brandishing a large knife near Times Square.
I saw this guy running in the middle of the street, police chasing him. He had like a machete type knife, and he didn't want to stop or nothing.
Police gunfire stopped the man after, say authorities, he lunged at them after being pepper sprayed and told repeatedly to drop the weapon. You're listening to ABC News.
People say to me all the time, Mike, why does Ford need a guy like you when they got a guy like Jim Twitchell? Now, Jim, you've been with Ford now for how long?
24 years, thankfully.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Mike.
According to my notes here, Ford says the works can more than pay for itself. What does that mean?
The Works Fuel Saver package is an excellent value. It more than pays for itself in fuel economy by checking your tire pressures and by making sure that you have the proper grade of oil and making sure that everything is running and operating smoothly.
Get a great deal on service and save money on gas at your local Ford dealer. The Works Fuel Saver package includes an oil change, tire rotation, multi-point inspection, and more. Just $29.95 or less after $10 mail-in rebate.
So the position of my Ford dealership is saving money is good and saving gas is good, correct?
Correct.
And with the Works, you get both?
You get both.
I love this. This is great. I'm going to get one. Where do I get them?
Get to your Ford dealer.
You heard it.
Up to 5 quarts oil, taxes, diesel, and disposal fees extra. Claim based on EPA averages. See participating Ford dealer or visit FordOwner.com for rebate details through 8/31/12.
Today was the penultimate day at the London Olympics. That's next to last day for the definition challenged. ABC's Tom Rivers has the day's wrap-up.
U.S. women triumphed again. On the basketball court, they defeated France 86-50. They also won gold in the 4x400-meter relay, beating Russia and sprinting over 4 seconds faster than the Jamaican bronze medalists. And 21-year-old Brigida Barrett achieved a personal best in winning the high jump silver medal. But Brazil upset the U.S. women 3-1 for a second straight volleyball gold. In the men's 10-meter individual platform dive, David Badilla took gold, and Usain Bolt outsprinted the U.S. men on the last leg of the 4x100-meter sprint relay. Tom Rivers, ABC News, London.
72-year-old Hugh Armstrong is home, safe in Clayton, North Carolina. He was vacationing in New Hampshire last month when he fell into a ravine. He couldn't remember his name. He apparently felt drawn to North Carolina, walking and hitching his way south. His daughter, Sarah McLaughlin, said her dad even took odd jobs along the way.
He worked for a farmer for 3 days who gave him room and board, and then headed further south where he got to Asheville, hoping to see people that he recognized.
Armstrong heard his granddaughter's name mentioned in Asheville, and that's when his memories came flooding back to him. A sheriff's deputy found him trying to walk home more than 200 miles away. This is ABC News.
If you've missed mortgage payments, are being threatened with foreclosure, or have been the victim of predatory lending, call United Against Foreclosure. 1-866-580-9999. United Against Foreclosure can get you the help you need to stop the foreclosure process, lower your monthly payments, and help save your home. Call 1-866-580-9999 now. That's 1-866-580-9999. Not available in all areas.
I'm Richard Cantu, ABC News.
This is Jack Peterson with the latest featured animals up for adoption at the Forever Paws Animal Shelter at 300 Linwood Street in Fall River. They have some great cats up for adoption. Miles is a 3-year-old brown and white tiger who's very handsome, friendly, playful, enjoys being held, and tolerates other animals. Mr. Cuddles is a 9-month-old stunning black cat with gorgeous green eyes and is sweet, charming, loves attention, and enjoys being brushed. Rhoda's a beautiful 5-year-old calico who's eligible to be adopted through the Senior to Senior Adoption Program. She has a lively personality at times, but settles down nicely and enjoys attention. Now, if you're 55 years or older and adopt Rhonda, the regular adoption fee of $100 is reduced to only $5. This program is funded by the Coalition for Animals of Greater New Bedford. For more information, call the shelter at 508-677-9154 or visit their website at www.foreverpaws.com.
Welcome
spooky Southcoast.
Look, I know the supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
AM 1420, WBSM presents Spooky South Coast with your hosts, Tim Weisberg and Matt Costa.
All right, welcome back. Hour number 2 of Spooky South Coast. Tim Weisberg here, along with science advisor Matt Moniz. We've got Kate in studio as well. She's just going to be our new, in-studio mascot. Yeah. You get to be what we call on Spooky TV the eye candy. Because when they see us, they just want to poke out their eyes. So you can be the saving grace. All right, hopefully during the break you got a chance to go to cosmicveil.com, V-E-I-L, cosmicveil.com, and check out our guest tonight, Thomas Fusco. We'll be getting right back into the conversation in just a second. But I did, during the break there, I did try and tout our first ever tout on tout. See, it's kind of weird. Like, at least with Twitter, you get to say tweet and tweeting, tweeted, twatted, whatever you want to say. But whatever, however they put it. But on tout, it's like I touted a tout on tout. Kind of doesn't work, but it's there anyway. It's uploading. It's uploading right now on tout. So if you have the app on your phone, then check it out. Just look for myself, Tim Weisberg, Weisberg, and you'll find it on there. I guess we're going to have to put it up on the website. If I start doing it, we'll have a little link to what my tout page is. But I'm not totally sure that we're going to stick with it because 15 seconds was just not enough time for us to talk about tonight's guest in there, which we tried to do. So let's get right back into the discussion with our guest, Tom Fusco. And Tom, I was thinking during the break about what we were talking about how you said that your theory, your model that you're putting out there is not based in philosophy, but is instead based in science. I mean, there is a lot of philosophical crossing over with a lot of today's advanced science. I mean, and some of it's hard to find where those lines are between the science, the spiritual, and the supernatural. It seems like so many of those lines are getting blurred, even though, the quote-unquote scientists don't want to admit as much.
Well, again, what our challenge is to come up with paradigms, with ways of looking at things that reveal the underlying causes. And sometimes scientific advancement is made just by stumbling upon these paradigms. One of these examples that I use for this is to talk about how many years or even centuries that we puzzled over phenomena like earthquakes and volcanoes and even mountain formation. And we were able to discern certain things about them, but there was a lot of mystery still involved in them until someone came up with the paradigm that we call today plate tectonics and continental drift. Once we understood that paradigm, suddenly all of our data, all of our observations came together, the veil was lifted, we could understand everything, many things about volcanoes, earthquakes, how they're related, how the mountains were formed, to a degree, once again, that today even a school child could understand it easily because we've come up with that paradigm. Mm-hmm. And this is what I've tried to do, to come up with these new ways of looking at existing data, existing information, not speculative, but hard evidence that we already have, and to come up with a model where that evidence actually fits in and begins to make sense so we can see the underlying interrelationships.
Let's kind of break it down as simply as we can for some of the people that are listening tonight, because I do find that there are a lot of people who are getting into this field who are just kind of starting out and just beginning to understand the physics as we currently believe in them and how they relate to something such as ghosts, for example. So our theory is that a ghost is maybe the soul of a deceased person, or maybe the transference of the energy of a person when they die. But under your model, I mean, how would we kind of be looking at the very concept of a ghost?
Well, what we would be looking at is more along the lines of information. Now, if we take a normal living human being, we take a look at everything that they're comprised of, the physical body, the brain, the mental capacity of it, all the different types of facts and capabilities. What we are really looking at is a highly complex collection of information. The intelligence that we have by itself is a very specific kind of coherent, active, living information. Now, when we start looking at it that way, if we were to think of a disembodied intelligence, all we would be doing is essentially subtracting the materialized information of the body. That's the material part of it. But we would still have a coherent collection of information that would represent that intelligence. And so when we look at it this way, the idea of a ghost, quote unquote, or what we should more say is a disembodied intelligence, because a ghost is actually a physically observable manifestation of that intelligence or that information. When we start looking at it that way, it begins to bring these kinds of traditional philosophical, metaphysical, and religious ideas into the realm of scientific reason.
Sure, because that information that you're speaking of is what religions believe to be the soul, what philosophers might believe to be our essence and our consciousness. So basically then, I guess we could say that a ghost is just a transformation of that information, or is it just that information separating from the information of the body? Yeah, I'm not quite sure if there's a transformation involved in what you're saying, or if it's just that disconnect, just that split from the physical information.
Well, to me, I'm interpreting the word ghost as an older term that today we use visible apparition for. Ghost is an old traditional term. Let's take a look at it in a little...
Well, hold on, because I don't think that we would need to actually... we don't need to differentiate in terms of the ghost, because if what you're saying is that it is just that, I think what you're saying would apply to all types of ghostly phenomena, not just that physical manifestation of a spirit or a specter, but the way that we interact with ghosts through spirit communication, the EVPs that we capture, the knocks on the wall that we hear. I mean, to me, what you're saying sounds like it would make sense across the board.
Yeah, and it does. And we're really talking a little bit right now about differences in terminology. I admit that in my book and in my work, I have tried to get a bit more precise about terminology than what has traditionally been done, again, because of the lack of a good scientific framework. So for me, a ghost is something that is visible. That would be traditionally the way of looking at it. Whereas an intelligence that might be connected to that ghost, I myself wouldn't call that a ghost. Do you see what I mean?
Sure, no, I see what you mean.
So we're really dealing about semantics. But as far as the information point of view, let's take a occurrence that has been observed from time to time. Let's say we have sites that are apparently haunted, where occupants of that particular house or visitors to that particular building see a particular apparition. And this apparition is clear enough where we have recognizable features, where it actually looks like a person that you could distinguish them or pick them out of a lineup, so to speak. And then some investigator starts doing some historical digging and finds a 75-year-old photograph of someone who dwelled in that house and starts showing it to all the people who saw the apparition. And they say, oh my gosh, that's the guy. That's the person I saw. That's him. Well, if we take it and look at it scientifically, that photograph is a recording of a collection of information. We know that now. It's common knowledge in the computer age when we print pictures from our hard drives. We're accustomed to looking at it that way. So if someone sees an apparition that is virtually identical in appearance to this photo, then the information that is recorded in that photo is the same information that's materializing in front of us when we see an apparition.
Okay.
This helps clear our minds of many different confusions that we get when we start thinking about the supernatural. And this paradigm about materializing information begins to crystallize things and allows us to begin to understand them and dissect them logically.
Well, Moniz, let me ask you, you're a scientist and you've been investigating the paranormal for pretty much longer than most of our audience has been alive.
Okay.
But what do you... I just like to pick on Moniz.
Is that good or bad, right?
Yeah, we just pick on him, Tom. So feel free to join in on the fun. But Moniz, I mean, what's from what Tom's saying here? I mean, how does this apply to your work and your research?
It's pretty much no different. I mean, you come up with a theory, you find various ways to test it. You look at it from the different viewpoints other people have. Is it a passed on spirit? If it's a passed on spirit, as most people think it is, people are just energy, and energy can be measured.
And in this case, we're just kind of substituting information for energy.
Right.
More
Information and energy aren't all of that different. All energy is bits of information and different vibrations. I mean, there's different ways to measure it.
To me, Tom, it seems like you've found the answer to the question that I've always had, and that some investigators have posed as well, of we understand that this energy is left over, and we can almost buy into the idea of what we call a residual haunting. The idea that, this energy imprint is left behind. What always makes us scratch our head is what we call the intelligent haunting, which is where it's more than just the ghost walking down the same staircase every day at the same time, and it can actually interact and have intelligence with you. You've basically decided that the information is also carried through in that energy. So I'm sorry, Moniz, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, I was going to say, well, I have the perfect opportunity coming up in a case in a month or so. I've got a chance to check out a house that's become haunted. And what makes this really special, in a certain sense, is I know the people that it's haunted by now. It's from basically where I grew up. A mother and a father and a child all died in the house, and the current resident is experiencing, quote unquote, a haunting. And I knew the family, so here's a chance for me to go check something out. Is this the people I knew?
And it sounds like, Tom, you would say that it would be, because it's the same information.
Well, certainly what Moniz, what puts you in a very advantageous position, like you're saying, is that you have an uncommon knowledge of the informational database.
Correct.
Would be representative of these people. So you would be able to identify a lot of details and a lot of little snippets of information that the average person would not be able to pick up on.
Right. Your average ghost hunting group coming in from East Kokomo or wherever wouldn't know these people, whereas I grew up with them.
Yes, it's a very unique opportunity. But to go back to the question about energy, so to speak, now this is something where I throw most paranormal investigators a curveball. And this has to do with this energy concept. And I'll explain what I mean. What I believe, and what I believe the evidence shows, is that this information from which reality is derived does not necessarily originate in the physical universe. This information actually originates from above the physical universe. It is still part of reality, the grand scheme of things, but it resides in and originates from a superphysical set of physical reality. Some people might try to think of it as a fifth dimension or a higher dimension. Although that's not 100% accurate, it kind of gives the right mental impression. This information has gone by many different names throughout history. Plato called it forms. The Bible calls it the logos, which is a Greek word that means matrix, mind, thought, pattern, order. There really isn't any, English equivalent to it. In the 20th century, we have a very prominent physicist, David Bohm, calling it implicate order. And he said that implicate order gave rise to the physical universe of explicate order. But the implicate order itself was not physical. It gave rise to the physical. And of course, we look at things like Edgar Cayce called it the Akasha. He said this was this body of information where not only he could draw from what someone's illness was 1,000 miles away, but he could also draw from that collection of information a cure. The information for the cure did not exist in the physical body. It existed in a higher realm that included the information of the physical body. So if this is the case, which is what I believe all the evidence points to, we have a problem with this idea of energy. And that is that energy is physical. Energy is, energy manifests itself physically as a particle that propagates as a wave. These are physical. All energy is conveyed by waves. Waves all have frequency and they have amplitude. These are dimensional. The frequency is the temporal dimension, and the amplitude is the spatial dimensions of Einstein's space-time. The information is stored independently from that. So, to me, the information is superphysical, what I call supergeometric, which is superdimensional. And therefore, saying a term like spirit energy, in my model, is a conflict in terms. It's an oxymoron. It's like saying honest politician. Spirit energy. The interesting thing, guys, is according to my model, these measurements of energy and the conveyance of information physically in this energy is a result of the interaction between the environment in which these pieces of information materialize and their surrounding physical content. So in other words, it's the interaction between the emerging of materializing information and the surrounding physical content like atmosphere that actually creates the energy that we measure and see. The spirit is not stored as energy itself. It's just the materialization of these spiritual elements interacting with its physical surroundings is what creates these measurable energies.
See, I think this might work for a lot of the critics and skeptics of today's paranormal investigators because we're going into these locations making assumptions. We're making assumptions that the energy of the spirit can be recorded, that it can have an effect on, say, the electromagnetic field. We're seeing these EMF fluctuations and we're automatically assuming that that is in relation to the presence of a spirit when there really is no proof of that. And it seems like with your model, it can almost kind of be a little bit more of a logical step into why that can happen.
Yeah, in other words, again, we go back to that. You're exactly right. We go back to that commercial that I was talking about, where all we can see is the person floating down the street in a seated driving position and automatically assume that the measurable energy is being sourced from what we can see. When the reality is that if we understood what the invisible car looked like, we could understand that the engine is generating its own electromagnetic field. And when the driver that we actually see, the ghost, if you will, presses on the gas pedal, the level of electromagnetism rises, even though the driver himself is not creating the electromagnetic field.
Well, I guess for the critical aspect of this, I always have a problem with those who make leaps in logic. That's where it kind of irks me. And we have so many people that are in this field that don't quite understand the science of what they're talking about to begin with, and they're already making these huge leaps in logic. And this can fill in the holes in that regard. I mean, this can be the missing link of explaining why the paranormal can exist scientifically.
Yes, this is the breakthrough of this work. And one of my challenges in talking about this work on many different radio shows is not so much to have people understand the mechanics of what I'm talking about. What's difficult to convey to them is the enormous implications of what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to envision because it's just so far beyond the current state of the art. Let me give you one example and see if we can lead into this a little bit and talk actually a bit about the meat and potatoes of this.
Sure.
Excuse me. One of the things that all physical content in the universe, this is what Einstein called it. We had space and we had physical content within that space. All of the physical content in the universe, according to Einstein's model, shares one characteristic, no matter what form that physical content takes, and that is that space and time is curved around it. Space and time bends around the physical content in the universe, or what Einstein called a matter point, within the continuous field of space. Now, if a curvature of space-time is common to all materialized reality, and if what I am saying is correct, that the universe is an expression of materialized information, then everywhere we see materialized and materializing information, we should see a bending of space-time. And guys, if there's a bending of space-time in association with materializing information, this is something that's experimentally measurable, it is testable, and it would have predictable manifestations, predictable observations. So this is where I begin to talk about how this relates to a paranormal haunting.
Well, it seems like with the bending of the space-time, I mean, what would be the effect of that would be measurable to those who don't follow these theories?
This is where we get into the good stuff. Imagine a area of space within a haunted house that begins to expand. Let's say like a bubble. It swells. It's like what I liken it to. Imagine an old inner tube, an old rubber inner tube in a tire. It's got a weak spot. If you fill it with air, a bubble starts coming out in one spot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that. And imagine that happening in a haunted house, not in the vacuum of space or of the cosmos, but in a haunted house, we have physical content everywhere. In fact, the most common physical content we're going to have is air, atmosphere, gas, air molecules. So imagine a bubble like this expanding. These are the kinds of things that we would see. The first thing we would see, and Einstein demonstrated it to us, is that the region of space that was immediately surrounding this bend would become crushed. It would become compressed and twisted. Now, in the vacuum of the cosmos, that's no big deal. But in a haunted house, we have air molecules there in that twisted space. So what would happen? What would happen is that those atoms, the atoms in the gas will get excited. They're under mechanical pressure. And they will begin to excite the electrons inside of those atoms.
Plasma.
That could be one of the results of it. But what I'm talking about is even if we stay in the third state of matter, Let's argue, for example, that we're speaking of just gas. Because you guys know we have solid, liquid, gas, and plasma, the 4 states of matter.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say if we just stay with gas, we would still be exciting electrons. These electrons would jump up into their higher orbits, and one of the first things that this model would predict is we would detect electromagnetic fields literally coming out of thin air, literally out of the air, because that's exactly where they're originating from. This is the idea where I'm saying that I don't believe there's any such thing as spirit energy. I believe that the mechanisms that materialize this extra-physical information in our local space, interfacing with the physical content surrounding it, is what causes the energetic measurements.
Okay, so it's not the spirit itself that's the energy that we're measuring. It's the reaction of. Okay, it's an after. So I think that does make a lot more sense than the theory that the manifestation itself is manipulating it. You know what I mean? And instead of it being the entity that's causing the spike, it's the
effect.
It's the
in other words, there's more to it than just the direct. Oh, the spirit, drained my batteries. The spirit drained energy to create a cold spot. There's a mechanism in between. And one thing I do ask people to think about, if they cling to this idea that spirits are released and maintained as physical energy, most of those people also believe that the spirit of a person persists eternally. Well, if that's the case, and if it's made of physical energy, we have a problem. And Moniz, you could certainly confirm this, is that, when our sun goes supernova, all organized patterns within all the matter and energy content of our Earth will be scattered. It will be destroyed and turned chaotic. All we will have is elementary patterns of basic waves and basic particles. We wouldn't have the kind of highly complex and organized information that would be identified as an individual intelligence.
Yeah, when the sun goes supernova, our planet is going to be reduced basically to subatomic particles.
Yeah, we're going to have basically a mini region of cosmic soup like existed at the Big Bang at the beginning of the universe. So no coherent pattern or order is going to be able to be maintained in that environment. So if you believe that spirits are stored as energy, then you also believe that all earthly spirits will cease to exist when the sun goes supernova.
Well,
so if you believe the spirits persist forever, our spirits are eternal, then you need to lose the idea that spirits comprise energy. They can only be one or the other.
I want to go back, Tom, to something that you said just a few minutes ago. I want to get back a little bit more into the idea of the measurement of these spirits and the difference between what we might think of as spirit energy and the way that you're describing it under your model. Would it be fair to say that essentially what we're measuring is not the energy of the spirit, which is what we think we are, but we're almost measuring the downloading of that information? It's almost like we're measuring the buffering rate for that information to download and come into our view?
Yeah, we're essentially observing the effect of materializing information within a bending of space-time, interacting with the surrounding physical content. So, like I said, this would excite electrons. It would create an electromagnetic field, literally out of thin air. And one of the other things that would happen is what I say in the world of the electron, what goes up must come down. These electrons will expend that energy, that excitation, fall back down into their lower orbits. And when they do that, they can emit a few things.
A photon?
One of the things that they can emit is photons. And so we have a technology today that we exploit that quantum physical feature all the time. We take electromagnetic field, pass it through a material, excite the electrons drop back down, emit photons. That's basically what a light-emitting diode does.
So we would essentially be seeing this manifestation is the projection of the light from that reaction happening.
Well, yeah, it's a reaction of from energy going from one state back to another. And the course of going through that, the photon is emitted. And
or we could look at it in terms of it moving from one quanta to the other, or one valence.
So we've explained EMF fluctuation. We've explained the luminescence of the spirit. And I'm assuming, too, that these reactions would account for the temperature fluctuations as well.
Well, absolutely. And I did want to add one thing, and I usually say this in an interview because it gets people's attention. Here we're talking about a spherical bubble of space-time. It is a perfect sphere because it has yet to have any materializing information in it. We just have a sphere jacketed in an electromagnetic field and emitting photons. This is a scientific model of what people call a luminous orb. It would explain exactly what it does and how it behaves.
Are you listening to that, Dave Francis? That means you can't throw out every orb, then.
And that's stuff I've said for years. When you real paranormal, quote-unquote, orbs are self-luminous. They generate their own light. They're not the refractive light of dust particles and water floating around in the air.
Absolutely. Now, here's another aspect that we would have. You mentioned the cold spots. Again, we have to differentiate an expanding bubble of space-time that would happen in the vacuum of the cosmos and locally with physical content like air. If one of these bubbles expanded like this, we would have within the core of that bubble a temporary vacuum. It would be a temporary void of material, like the air molecules, the air atoms, and the heat energy which is contained within that air. So if it happened very slowly, the laws of equilibrium would allow a flow in from the outside to be able to fill in the vacuum, so to speak. And we would have an equilibrium. We would see very little fluctuation.
An endothermic reaction.
Exactly. But if it happened quickly...
Exothermic.
Oh, there you go. But if it happened quickly, like if you walked up to your, if you woke up one morning on a winter's day and threw open your front door, you would have a difference in pressure. You would detect a barometric pressure difference. You would detect a thermal difference. You would actually have a cold spot. Now, another thing that could happen if it opened up quick enough is that if we're moving, I talked about this earlier, if we have an area of low pressure with an adjacent area of high pressure, the air molecules are going to move from the high pressure area to the low pressure area. And we would also experience one of these mystery breezes where they feel a quick breeze go by where there's no doors and windows open.
Well, I do want to throw the phone lines open if anybody has any questions for our guest, Thomas Fusco. And again, just to remind everybody, his book is Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality, Merging Science, the Spiritual, and the Supernatural. And his website is cosmicveil.com, cosmicveil.com. The numbers, if you want to call in, ask a question or share a comment, 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. Email spookycrew@spookysouthcoast.com or jump in the chat room at spookytv@spookysouthcoast.com. And Kate, you live in a haunted house, probably one of the most haunted houses around. And so I don't know how this makes you feel now going home. You're going to be racking your brain trying to apply all the scientific things that we're talking about here tonight to what goes on in your home.
I already am.
So see, Tom, we bring in firsthand experience with us to the show.
That's a good thing. People are surprised to learn that, number one, I am not a paranormal investigator. And number two, I have never witnessed any of this stuff.
Would you like to? Because Kate can invite you over our house.
Come on over.
Sometimes part of me is envious of that experience, and part of me is glad that I don't have that experience. Because it does allow me, in a sense, to kind of take a neutral observation, like an objective outsider looking in, so to speak. But you can tell by the way I talk about this is that I certainly affect or accept the validity of all these type of phenomena. I don't think there's any question that these things are legitimate and real, and they do occur. Another aspect I wanted to mention real quick, and anytime we have this kind of an emerging electromagnetic field, we're also going to have heat energy associated with it. And so this is why we see something else very strange at paranormal sites, where what we would have is the outside of this bubble generating a heat signature. Because when the electrons fall back down their lower valences, one of the things they can also emit is heat, thermal energy. So here we have a jacket of a heat signature around it, but inside of the bubble, we have a cold spot. And that's why we experience and measure both things simultaneously at the same locations, because one's occurring at the outer surface and one's occurring inside of it.
Well, we spent a great deal of the program talking about ghosts in particular, Tom, but one of the things I want to ask you about, and you write about it in the book, is the idea of UFOs, because that's another thing that's really Moniz' bread and butter in terms of his research, and it's also something that, a lot of people say, hey, I'm willing to accept that people are having these sightings. I'm willing to accept that they're having these interactions, and even to the point of abductions, but so many people can't wrap their mind around whether or not UFOs could actually be spaceships from another planet.
Well, yes, and what I ask people to do, just as a starting point, is play the forensist. Imagine we're forensists. We're not the criminology unit. We're not concerned about the criminology. We're leaving that up to another team altogether. We're focusing on the physics of it. So if we're doing that, then in the paranormal hauntings, we're going to dismiss temporarily any idea of ghosts or spirits out of our mind. And the UFO arena, we're going to dismiss the idea of aliens out of our minds. Not that they don't exist, but we're not going to consider them. We're just going to look at the physical observations and the phenomena themselves. And when we do so, what we find out is that UFOs, what we observe them doing, share a lot of things in common with paranormal hauntings. We see them appear and disappear, or if you want to say materializing or dematerializing. We see these observations move in incredible speed and in incredible ways without any visible or detective means of propulsion, exactly like we see in poltergeist phenomena. It's the exact same kind of thing. We actually see these things change shapes, and we see that also in paranormal observations, where things kind of fade in and out, where they may be shapeless and then they take on a form and then they become a little bit more ambiguous or vaporous. We see all these things occur. Now, if we go back to the premise that the universe is put together one way, that it consists of a single set of principles and laws which can describe every subset within it, that means even though we don't fully understand all those laws and principles, that they apply to the paranormal and they apply to the UFO. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to physically observe them. They must be consistent with those laws and principles. My argument is this: if we are able to identify the exact science of the paranormal, so much so that we can build technology based on those principles, we will be able to build devices or craft that do every single thing that we see UFOs do.
So we would essentially be able to experience the same thing, and then that might make it a little bit more understandable for people that can't figure out how they can do this. But you did say we have to remove the aliens from that from this argument
temporarily.
So now I want to bring them back into it a little bit.
Okay.
And say then how do we account for people's abduction phenomena and close encounters?
Well, abduction phenomena is difficult for me to comment on, simply because it is not something that I can observe.
Okay, fair enough.
And in other words, without invalidating it, because I don't invalidate it, I consider it a possibility. but it's difficult for me to ascertain anything definite about it. The only time I was ever able to ascertain anything with any kind of definitiveness was on a recent show where we had a call-in who was an abductee. And he explained to me what it was like, what he experienced during the transition between him sitting in his bedroom in front of his computer and then him laying on this table inside of this UFO, and what various parts of the UFO look like. And I tell you what, guys, it kind of stood my hair on end for the first time, because the process, what he was explaining, what he saw, was exactly what my model would predict about what a teleportation would be like.
Which is what?
Well, it would be a dematerialization process, while the information is still stored superphysically and then rematerialized at a different location that is not quite fully physical.
Mm-hmm.
So where some people talk about where certain aspects of being inside the UFO, they look at certain things and it looks really concrete and hard. And they look at other aspects of it and it looks kind of fuzzy or hazy or transparent, without realizing that they're describing the very same kinds of appearance that a lot of apparitions look like.
True.
And so this would kind of be what a craft that was kind of existing on the border between partially materialized and fully materialized would look like.
So if this transformation from sitting in your chair to lying on the ship is, how should I put, if it really is just that type of transformation of the information, of the teleportation, I guess is how we would perceive it. Then does that mean that we would be able to harness that and utilize it to our own advantage? Can we take the information that's around us and transport ourselves to another location just by bringing about the information of that location?
Spooky action at a distance.
Oh, there you go. You got it. You got it. We just had an article talking about, a new achievement that they were able to achieve quantum teleport at 97 kilometers or something like that.
Yeah, there were two, between two islands.
Uh-huh.
They transported, it was done with lasers, if I'm not mistaken. Timing. They used a set of lasers to confirm what they were doing with two separate atoms that were able to be affected roughly about 90 kilometers apart.
Yeah, yep, and they were entangled.
Yep.
So,
Quantum entangled.
and people have to realize what we're talking about here. We're not talking about a Star Trek type teleportation and what these physicists did. They were talking about the instant transference of information about the state of a particular quantum particle from one location to the other, instantaneously, with no conductor of that information in between the two locations. So really what we're looking at, when they saw that instantaneous change 90 kilometers away, we're actually looking at the materialization, the rematerialization from outside of space-time, because there's no physical conduit, of information that originated 90 kilometers away. So according to my model, if let's go back to the paranormal and look at this for a minute, we're talking about the information.
So, Tom,
yes,
I was going to say, would you call it a quantum resonance?
You could call it that. But what I would say is not so much that, because, again, resonance has to do with what's physical.
Or harmonic?
That's also a physical, because it's a wave.
Well, we're watching physical actions. So that's why I'm saying that.
Mm-hmm.
How the information gets transferred, well, that's still what we're trying to get on here, right?
Right. In other words, this is actually a dematerialization and a rematerialization of information that exists outside of space-time. Now, could it be transported to a specific location? Theoretically, yes, because if we're going to follow Einstein's model of a continuous spatial field that is defined by 4 independent variables, height, width, depth, and time, that means that every coordinate in the universe, every physical coordinate in the universe, has its own unique frequency resonance. That means if we can identify the frequency resonance of a particular quadrant of space-time, a particular location, or have something like a Star Trek transportation pad that establishes a frequency resonance to that space that can be locked on, we could definitely transport matter from one location to the other by receding it. In other words, collapsing the bend of space around it until it dematerializes out of our physical plane, and then rematerialize it in a new bubble of space-time at the correct frequency resonance location. This is my model of teleportation. And this is what I see, because remember, we're talking about the photograph earlier, containing a record of all the information that the original person was made of. The real living person was made of that. And then we're seeing an apparition that's materializing from the same information. That means that the information from which the original person was built and the apparition and the photograph are all coming from the same source. And it's not physical. It's not stored locally.
Well, again, we have just a few minutes remaining in the program, so it's last chance if anybody has any questions. 508-996-0500, 1-877-996-1420. We have probably about less than 7 minutes remaining in the program, so we want to remind everybody that if you want to get the book, just go to cosmicveil.com, cosmicveil.com, to purchase Thomas Fusco's book, Behind the Cosmic Veil, A New Vision of Reality, Merging Science, the Spiritual, and the Supernatural. And we've still, even though, this is your second appearance with us, Tom, we've still really only scratched the surface of all that this book encompasses. And people should definitely pick it up and dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten the EVPs yet, have we?
Well, now we've only got a few minutes left, but let's bring up the idea of EVPs.
Well, what we didn't talk too much about was what the materialization of information inside these bubbles of space-time would look like. We were only talking about what I call secondary paranormal effects, which would be the result of the emerging of this environment, of this bubble of space-time. If we were to inject information into it and see that information begin to materialize, that bubble would begin to take on the exact shape dictated by the materialization of the information. So, for example, if we see an apparition of a 19th century Victorian lady, that bubble has now taken the exact geometric shape of that information, so that it has every little fold of the dress and the features of her face. It's no longer a sphere. It looks like a shell around her. Now, if we had a vocalization materialize, information of a vocalization, what would happen is that the surface of that space-time bubble would begin to vibrate with the frequency and the amplitude of the oscillation of that vocalization. And what we would have is two different things based on the wavelength or the frequency. We would have, number one, an acoustical compression, where the actual fabric of the edge of that bubble is vibrating the air. And so we would suddenly hear a disembodied voice come out of midair because the actual face of space is acting like a speaker that's vibrating like the speaker paper. At a lower wavelength, we wouldn't get an acoustical effect. But remember, the bubble is jacketed by an electromagnetic field. So we would have a vibration there where the electromagnetic field would create an electromagnetic compression wave.
Which would be picked up on in the electrics of a microphone.
Exactly. It would induce itself directly on the copper coils that are connected to the acoustic diaphragm, bypassing the diaphragm, bypassing the need for the diaphragm to move the coil through a magnet to create a compression wave, because the wave is already induced.
It's already in electron form.
That's right, you got it. So the electronics translates it, and we get an EVP, a materialized voice, where no one heard it acoustically standing right next to it.
I understood him.
Yeah, no, but I understand exactly what he's saying, and I'm just scratching my head that it doesn't have the logic holes that our regular, normal explanation for EVPs would have.
I've been told, and I know it, because I worked a lot of years on it. This is the first scientific model.
Oops, sorry, that was me.
That addresses every single one of these effects. Feelings of heaviness? Of course, space is being bent. It creates its own gravitational field. People are going to experience a feeling of heaviness. One after the other after the other. This model explains every single phenomenon in a simple and consistent way.
Well, I have to say, when I first found out about this book, and I think it was through an email that you had sent out before we had you on the first time, and I read, here's a guy who has a new theory of the paranormal, and it's going to change the way we think. I was like, yeah, sure. Because we've heard this quite a bit here in our 6+ years of doing this program. But I have to say, the more that I read it, the more that I hear about it, the more that I think it starts to make sense. And I think that if we can get enough people in the field to start wrapping their head around it, it'll definitely change the direction of where we can take what we call the paranormal field.
Absolutely. And it spreads beyond that.
Sure.
If matter and energy content of the universe is an expression or a result of a materialization of information within the bending of space, it's almost like a reverse model of the conventional model. This would explain perfectly why we can't find a gravitational boson, or what it is, a graviton, we call it.
Yeah.
It would explain perfectly why the standard model does not have an expression for gravity. It doesn't need it. It would explain why we see fields, regions of space, where we see the bending of space with no adjacent physical causal matter, where people have come up with this hypothetical model of this substance they call dark matter. This would eliminate the need for dark matter. It would eliminate the need for supersymmetry. It would eliminate the need for graviton.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Tom, again, and for delving deeper into this. And I look forward to discussing things with you more in the future.
It sounds great. I'll be happy to come back whenever you're ready.
All right. Thanks so much. Again, that is Thomas Fusco. His book is called Beyond the Cosmic Veil. You can get it from his website, cosmicveil.com. We are just about out of time for this week's show. Next week, we're going to be back on the air. I think the Red Sox are playing the Yankees, so we're going to be on at our regular time. And we are actually going to have joining us on the air next week the writers of the movie The Possession that's coming up. So stay tuned. We'll be back with that next week. Until then, stay spooktacular.
The station the latest news, weather, and sports, and WBSM New Bedford, AM 14.